My house on Willow Street in Frankfurt has seen so much life that sometimes I feel as if the walls have absorbed all our joys and sorrows like an old sponge. 75 years is a long time to realize that houses, like people, have character. Edmund and I got this house in 1968 when we were young and hopeful. Now I walk the creaky floorboards alone, wiping the dust off the framed photographs and listening to the wind in the gutters. My name is Dora Lasat. I was once Mrs. Edmund Lasat, but for 15 years now I have been a widow. Sometimes in the mornings, half asleep, I can still hear Edmund coming down the stairs, whistling his favorite tune from West Side Story. At times like this, I almost expect the coffee maker, which he always turned on first thing in the morning, to make a noise. But then reality returns, and I remember that the coffee maker broke a long time ago, and I never bought a new one. Why should I when I only drink 1 cup a day? Today, like every Tuesday, I'm wiping through the photos on the mantelpiece. Here's Edmund holding our newborn son, Hubert. What an unusual name we chose for him. Edmund insisted, said it would make the boy special. Well, in a way he did, but not quite as we'd hoped. Next to it is a picture of daughter Thelma in her graduation dress. She never went to college, even though we had money set aside for her education. Mom, it's a waste of time, she declared at the time. I want to travel, to explore the world. Education money turned into travel money, and then that ran out too. Thelma now lives in Arizona with her third husband, whom I've never seen in person. She calls on holidays, and our conversations always end with a request for money. One last time, Mom, I swear. Hubert at least doesn't live far away, only 20 minutes away. But sometimes I think the distance between us isn't measured in miles, but in something else, something more substantial. After Edmund died, Hubert came by every week to help with the house, sometimes even stayed for dinner. And then Justine came into his life. I remember the day he brought her to meet him. It was April. The trees had just turned a tender green. Justine was wearing a bright red dress that I thought was more appropriate for a cocktail party than a family dinner. She was talking loudly, laughing at her own jokes and constantly interrupting Hubert. But what struck me most was how my son changed in her presence. He looked at her as if she were a rare exotic flower that demanded constant admiration. Mom, Justine and I are thinking of getting married, he said then, and I could see in his eyes that the decision had already been made and my opinion was just a formality. What could I say? Congratulations, darling. I even forced myself to hug Justine, though her luscious perfume gave me an immediate headache. The wedding was lavish, with 300 guests, most of whom I was seeing for the first time. Edmund had left us a nice insurance policy, and a good portion of it had gone to the gala. You want your only son to have a decent wedding, don't you? Justine asked, looking as if she doubted my answer. Of course I did. Who wouldn't? After the wedding, their visits became less frequent. Once a month, then once every 2 months. And when their firstborn, my grandson Ethan, was born, I found out about it from a post on a social networking site I hardly ever use. I had to ask a neighbor to help me find that post so I could at least see a picture of the newborn. My neighbor Miriam Fenton is the only person who regularly stops by my house just for fun, for no particular reason. She's 10 years younger than me, a widow like me. But unlike me, she hasn't let age get in the way of an active life. Miriam swims 3 times a week, is a member of a book club, and has even recently mastered those fancy computer gizmos. What's their name? Smartwatches. She tried to convince me to get one too, but I refused. Why would I want to know how many steps I take from the kitchen to the living room? Dora, you're too confined to your 4 walls, Miriam often tells me. Life doesn't end at 75. Mine is almost over, I usually reply, and we both laugh, even though we both realize there's truth in every joke. Miriam knows about my complicated relationship with Justine. She even witnessed our altercation once, when Justine came to borrow my china set for a charity event. Miriam was just having tea with me when the doorbell rang. Oh, Miriam's here. How nice, Justine said in a tone as if she had discovered a dead fly in her teacup. Dora, may I speak to you privately? Miriam had tactfully retreated to the kitchen, but our house is old and the walls are thin, and I'm sure she heard every word. Why aren't you answering my messages? Justine pounced on me. I texted you about the service until 3 days ago. I don't check my phone very often, I replied truthfully. Geez, Dora, we live in the 21st century. Even my grandmother knows how to use a smartphone, and she's 80. I remained silent, even though everything was boiling inside. Her grandmother, you see, is tech savvy. No wonder Justine had grown up with the expectation that the whole world should revolve around her. So can I have the set? She asked impatiently, tapping her foot on the floor. This set was a wedding gift from Edmund's parents. We only used it on special occasions, and every cup, every saucer held memories of family holidays when we all got together and were happy. Of course, I said at last. It's in the cafeteria. Just please be careful. Justine rolled her eyes. Dora, it's just dishes. No, I wanted to scream, it's not just dishes. It's part of my life, my story. But I kept quiet, as I always do. When Justine left with the box in which she'd carelessly stacked my precious set, Miriam came back from the kitchen with a look on her face like she'd swallowed a lemon. And you let her talk to you like that? She asked. I shrugged. She's Hubert's wife. What can I do? You can remind her who the mistress of this house is, Miriam said firmly. Dora, you've indulged your children all your life. Maybe it's time to think about yourself. I often think of those words, especially when I lie awake, listening to the night sounds of the old house. Miriam is right. I have always put my children first. When Edmund died of a heart attack in 2007, I was only 60. Many women my age were starting new lives, traveling, making new acquaintances, some even remarried. And I was immersed in taking care of my children and grandchildren, as if trying to compensate for the absence of their father and grandfather. Thelma had just divorced her first husband and was depressed. I gave her almost all of my savings so she could start over. Hubert at the time was trying to launch his own business, some kind of online platform for rare book lovers. The idea failed after 6 months, but by then I had already invested a considerable amount of money in it. Looking back now, I realized that they took my generosity for granted. Maybe it was something I'd taught them. Edmund always said I was too soft on children. Dora, they should know the value of money, he used to say. But after he died, it was like I was trying to fill the void with material things. My set was never returned. A week after the incident, Justine sent a message. I'm sorry, Dora, but there's been a small incident. 2 cups broke. I'll buy you a new set. Of course she didn't, and I didn't remind her. For the past few years, our relationship with Justine and Hubert has become a strange dance where everyone knows their steps, but no one is enjoying themselves. They come over when they need something. Money for a new car, help with the kids, when they want to take a vacation or just to borrow something, which is then never returned, and me. I always say yes, because I'm afraid if I say no, I'll never see them again. The grandchildren, Ethan now 11 and Peyton 8, come even less often than their parents. Mostly for Christmas and my birthday, and even then, I suspect, only because they know there will be presents. They're always in a hurry to leave, as if they're afraid old age is contagious. Miriam says I should set boundaries. Tell them your bank is closed, she advises. But how can I? They are my family, all I have left. I have another secret that even Miriam doesn't know about. Underneath this old house, in a small safe hidden in the basement behind a rack of canned goods, is an envelope. In it are the deeds to the house and a bank account with the amount I've been saving little by little over the years. Not that it was a fortune, about $300,000, but enough to provide for a decent old age. Edmund always said, Dora, save something for yourself. Children must learn to stand on their own feet. For a long time, I ignored his advice, handing out money left and right. But 5 years ago, when Hubert asked for a large sum of money for a down payment on their new house, something inside me shook. I gave him the money, but after that, I started saving in a secret account. Maybe it's my little insurance against total dependence on my kids in the future. Sometimes I feel guilty about that secret. Shouldn't a mother give everything to her children? But then I remember how Justine talks about my old-fashioned lifestyle, how Hubert has stopped taking an interest in my affairs, how the grandchildren look right through me, and the guilt recedes. The house creaks quietly, as if agreeing with my thoughts. It, too, holds its secrets, having accumulated our family's stories within its walls over the years. Sometimes I think it's the only one that truly understands me. I walk over to the window and look outside. The neighbor boy Liam is riding his bike down the sidewalk. He must be as old as Hubert was when Edmund taught him to ride without training wheels. I remember how proud Hubert was the first time he rode by himself, without his father's support, his face shining with happiness and pride. Somewhere in the back of the house, the phone rings, snapping me out of my memories. I slowly walk towards the sound, knowing it's probably Miriam. She's the only one who calls on a landline. Everyone else uses a cell phone, which I often forget to charge. Dora? Miriam's voice sounds cheerful as always. Did you remember there's a book club meeting tomorrow? We're discussing Murder on the Orient Express. I sigh. Miriam, you know I don't go to book club. But you should. You need socializing, Dora. You can't stay home alone all the time. I'm not alone, I say, even though we both know that's not true. I have things to do. Miriam snorts. What kind of things? Wiping dust off pictures? Dora, you need new experiences, new people. I know she's right, but the very thought of sitting in a room full of strangers discussing a book I probably read 30 years ago makes me panic. Maybe next time, I say, knowing I'll find an excuse even then. Miriam sighs but doesn't insist. We talk some more. About the weather, about her arthritis that bothers her on rainy days, about the new family that has moved in 3 houses down from me. Then she says goodbye, promising to stop by the other day. I return to the window and notice that it's already getting evening. The shadows are lengthening. The light is softer, more golden. This is my favorite hour when the day is almost over, but night has not yet fallen. Edmund usually came home from work at this hour, and the house was filled with the sounds of his presence, the rustle of the newspaper, the jingle of keys thrown on the dresser, his soft whistling. Now the house is especially quiet at this hour, and I feel my loneliness more acutely. I turn on the television just to hear human voices and go into the kitchen to make dinner. Nothing special. Scrambled eggs with greens and toast, a cup of herbal tea. When you live alone, you lose the motivation to cook anything complicated. I usually eat dinner in front of the TV, although Edmund has always insisted on eating at the table. Eating is a ritual, Dora, not just refueling, he used to say. But eating alone at the table is sad, and in front of the TV, you can at least pretend to have company. After dinner, I wash the dishes, wipe down the table, and check to make sure the front door is locked, even though I know I locked it back in the afternoon. Rituals like these fill my evenings, creating the illusion of busyness. Before I go to bed, I take a bath. Another little ritual I've kept from when Edmund was alive. The hot water helps to relax my joints, which are becoming more and more aware of themselves as I age. Lying in bed, I flip through an old photo album, another evening ritual. Here's Edmund and I on our wedding day, young and happy. Here's Hubert taking his first steps. Here's Thelma at the school concert playing the flute. It's strange how quickly time has flown by. It seems like only yesterday I was a young mother chasing after fidgety children, and today I'm an old woman whom those children barely notice. I close the album and turn off the light. In the darkness, the old house seems even more alive, crackling and sighing as if sharing its secrets with me. I listen to these sounds until I fall asleep, drifting off into a dream world where Edmund is still alive. The children are still small and need me, and I still feel needed and loved. Tuesdays and Fridays are cleaning days. Wednesdays, I go to the grocery store on the corner of Maple and Riverside. Thursdays are devoted to laundry and ironing. Sundays are rest days when I allow myself to watch old movies on TV or read my favorite Agatha Christie books, which I know almost by heart. But Saturdays and Mondays are always open in my schedule. They are days I've tacitly reserved for my family, for possible visits from Hubert, Justine, and the grandchildren. Not that they ask me when it's convenient, but I leave them open anyway, just in case. Monday morning greets me with the usual ritual: a cup of weak tea, toast with apricot jam, blood pressure pills, arthritis pills, and the vitamins Dr. Shepard prescribed. I carefully arrange them into little plastic containers with the days of the week on them. Edmund always joked about my pedantry, saying I could work as a pharmacist. I smile at that memory, though it feels heavy in my chest for a moment. The phone rings at 9:30 sharp. I know who it is before I even pick it up. Justine always calls at the same time, as if she has a special call my mother-in-law slot in her life. Good morning, Dora. Her voice sounds too chipper for a Monday. How are you feeling? This question is just a formality, a prelude to the real purpose of the call. I know that regardless of my answer, Justine will continue her monologue. Not bad, thanks, I reply, preparing myself for the inevitable. Great. Listen, I have a favor to ask of you. Hubert and I are planning a little get-together this Saturday, and I was thinking, of course she'd thought of it. Justine is always thinking of ways to use my house, my dishes, or my money for her own purposes. This time she wants my antique silver candlesticks to create atmosphere. I agree, though an inner voice reminds me of the fate of my china set that never came home after her little incident. You're a miracle, Dora, exclaims Justine with feigned enthusiasm. Hubert's picking them up Friday after work. I can bring them myself, I offer, secretly hoping to get an invitation to this reception. A brief pause betrays her confusion. Oh, you don't have to bother. You have trouble driving in the evening, don't you? That's true, but how would she know? I've never complained about it to her or Hubert. Apparently, any excuse is good enough for her not to invite me. Sure, let Hubert come over, I agree, swallowing my resentment. After the call, I glance at the calendar hanging on the kitchen wall. Today is the 12th of May. The last time Hubert and Justine came over was April 18th, exactly on my birthday, not a day earlier or a day later. They stayed for an hour, gave me a box of chocolates, even though they know I'm diabetic, and a bouquet of lilies, to which I'm allergic. The grandchildren gave cards, clearly chosen by Justine, too glossy, with impersonal wishes for favorite grandmother. I sigh heavily and go into the living room, where the candlesticks are kept in a secretaire. They've been there, wrapped in a soft cloth, since Edmund gave them to me for our 20th anniversary. The silver is a little tarnished, but that's easy to fix. I take out a special product and begin methodically polishing every curve, every facet, as if preparing them for an important ceremony. My hands work mechanically and my thoughts drift back to when Hubert was a boy. How he has changed since then. He used to be such a sensitive boy, always noticing when I was sad, bringing me homemade cards for no reason at all. But now his visits are scheduled, like business meetings, and always with a purpose. I remember how things began to change after his marriage to Justine. At first, the changes were almost imperceptible. He called less often canceling scheduled visits at the last minute. Then I noticed that each visit was accompanied by a request of some kind. Mom, could you watch Ethan this weekend? Justine and I have an important event. Or, Mom, remember that antique table in your bedroom? Justine thinks it would fit in perfectly with our decor. Gradually, our conversations became superficial, filled with common phrases and fake smiles. Hubert stopped telling me about his problems, his hopes and dreams. Instead, he talked about the promotion at work, the new car they plan to buy, the private school for Ethan. It's like my son has turned into a glossy picture from a magazine, beautiful but flat. But what really hurts is how his attitude toward me has changed. I used to be a pillar in his eyes, a source of wisdom and support. Now I feel like I'm just an obligation to him, an item on his to-do list. Call my mom. I finish polishing the candlesticks and carefully wrap them back in the cloth. They shine like new, ready to grace Justine's table and impress her guests. I wonder if she'll tell them that the candlesticks belong to her old-fashioned mother-in-law. I don't think so. I spend the rest of the day doing my usual chores, cooking dinner, chicken soup enough for several days, reading a little, watching the day's news. After lunch, Miriam calls, inviting me to tomorrow's book club meeting. I politely decline, as I've been doing for months now. It's not that I don't want to go, it's just that the thought of sitting in a room full of strangers makes me uncomfortable. Dora, you have to get out of the house, Miriam insists. You spend too much time alone. I like the solitude, I reply, though we both know that's not entirely true. Miriam sighs but doesn't press. She understands me better than anyone else. Okay, but if you change your mind, call me. Anytime. After talking to Miriam, I decide to pursue my little hobby, embroidery. When I was young, I didn't have time for hobbies. Everything was spent on work and family. But now, when the days stretch slowly and monotonously, embroidery has become my little salvation. I have been working on the painting Summer Garden for several months now. Each stitch is a moment of peace, when thoughts subside and hands are engaged in the usual work. Sometimes, immersed in my work, I forget about time, about my pains, about the fact that my house is too quiet and empty. Embroidery is my way of creating something beautiful in a world that often seems cold and indifferent. In the evening, an unexpected phone call rings. Hubert's name pops up on the phone screen. My heart involuntarily quickens its rhythm. He rarely calls on weekdays. Mom, are you busy? His voice sounds strained. No, what's wrong? Nothing's wrong. It's just, Justine and I were wondering if you could pick Ethan and Peyton up from school tomorrow. Justine has an important meeting with a client, and I won't be able to leave work early. I can feel conflicting emotions struggling inside me. On the one hand, I'm excited about the opportunity to spend time with my grandchildren. On the other, it's frustrating that Hubert only thinks of me when he needs help. Sure, I can take them, I say, trying to keep my voice sounding neutral. Great! I'll text you the address of the school and the time. They finish at different times, so you'll have to wait. He didn't even ask if I was comfortable waiting between shifts, if I had other plans for tomorrow. What plans could I possibly have, though? Okay, I'll be there. Thanks, Mom, you really help us out a lot. A short pause follows those words, and I almost hope he's going to ask how I'm feeling, how my day went. But instead, Hubert quickly says goodbye, citing that he has a lot of work ahead of him. I put my phone down and look out the window at the darkening sky. Suddenly, a sharp sense of loneliness overwhelms me. The big house where once there was laughter and lively conversations is now too quiet. Even the television, which I sometimes turn on for background, doesn't save me from this silence. Tuesday mornings start earlier than usual. I wake up at 5:30, even though I don't usually get up until 7. The excitement of seeing my grandchildren keeps me awake. I spend a long time deciding what to wear, but I settle on a light blue blouse and navy blue pants, practical and modern enough to keep Justine from rolling her eyes at the sight of me. The school is a 20-minute drive from my house. It's been a while since I've driven that distance, and I'm feeling a little stressed. My old Buick has served me faithfully for 15 years, but lately I've only used it for short trips to the store or the doctor. Arriving at the school a half hour early, I park and watch the parents already starting to gather at the gate. Young moms in trendy sportswear, phones in hand, fathers in business suits, clearly stopping by on their way home from work. I feel out of place among them, like I've accidentally walked into a party I wasn't invited to. Finally, Peyton, my youngest granddaughter, appears. She walks with her head down, adjusting the straps of her backpack, which seems too big for her fragile shoulders. I wave at her, and she doesn't immediately recognize me, which isn't surprising. We haven't seen each other since April. Grandma, her voice sounds surprised. Where's Mom? She has an important meeting, dear. I'm picking you and Ethan up today. Peyton nods, showing neither joy nor disappointment. She sits in the back seat of the car and pulls out her phone, momentarily immersed in her digital world. I try to strike up a conversation, asking about school, about friends, but I get only one-word answers. An hour later, Ethan comes out. He's taller than I remember and thinner. At 11, he already looks like a small adult with a serious expression and straight posture. Hi, Grandma, he says, climbing into the car. Mommy said you were taking us home? Yeah, but I was wondering if we could stop for something to eat first. You must be hungry after school. Ethan exchanges glances with his sister. Actually, Mom doesn't let us eat fast food, he says in a tone he clearly copied from Justine. Oh, I didn't mean fast food, maybe a cafe or… My mom says cafes are full of sugar and bad fats anyway, Peyton interrupts, not looking away from the phone. I feel a prick of disappointment. Even something as simple as treating my grandchildren to ice cream is out of reach because of Justine's rules. Okay, then we'll drive straight to your house, I agree, trying to hide my chagrin. On the way, I make several more attempts to get the grandchildren to talk, but to no avail. They respond politely but aloofly, as if talking to a stranger. In a way, they are. They only see me a few times a year, and each time I am like a stranger to them. When we pull up to their house, a beautiful 2-story building in an upscale neighborhood, I see that Justine's car isn't in the driveway. Do you have the keys? I ask the kids. Ethan nods and pulls a bunch out of his backpack pocket. Thanks for giving us a ride, Grandma, he says formally, like he's thanking the cab driver. How about I stay with you until Mom gets back? I suggest, even though I already know the answer. No need, Ethan replies confidently. We're big enough to be alone. Besides, we have a lot of homework. I nod, fighting the urge to insist. After all, they're not my kids, and it's not up to me to decide if they can stay home alone. Okay, I'll see you then, soon, I say, not knowing exactly when that soon will be. The kids get out of the car and walk towards the house without looking back. I wait until they get inside before I drive off. On the drive home, I can't help but feel like I've just performed a function like a robot or an appliance. Turned on, used, turned off. At home, I am greeted by silence, which now seems even more oppressive after spending time with my grandchildren. I turn on the radio, just to hear human voices, and set about making dinner, though I have no appetite. In the evening, Hubert calls, asking if everything went well. I say yes, the kids were great, everything was great. He thanks me and quickly says goodbye again. I lie in bed looking up at the ceiling and think about how our relationship with my son has changed. We used to be so close. I remember how we read books together before bed, how I helped him with his homework, how we discussed his first crush. What happened to that boy who wrote me touching Mother's Day cards and hugged me so tightly, as if he was afraid to let me go? Turned into a man who only calls when necessary and whose visits always have an ulterior motive. On Wednesday, I go to the grocery store as usual. Already on the way out, I run into Justine, which is surprising. She never shops in this neighborhood. Dora, she exclaims with feigned surprise. What a coincidence! I nod, knowing it's no coincidence. The store is only a few blocks from my house, and Justine must have known she could meet me here. How were the kids yesterday? Didn't cause any trouble? She asks, helping me put the bags into the cart. No, they were very obedient, I reply. Good. Listen, Dora, now that we've met, could you help us out this Saturday? We're having a barbecue for Hubert's coworkers, and we need help with the kids. I'd hire a babysitter, but all the good ones are already taken. So there you have it, the real reason for the chance meeting. On Saturday? I ask back, even though I know my schedule is empty. Yeah, I think I can help. Great. Justine smiles with obvious relief. Be there by 2. Oh, and one more little request. I knew there would be one more little request. There always is. Could you make your apple pie? Hubert told everyone how delicious it is, and now everyone wants to try it. I nod, feeling a strange mixture of pride and resentment. On the one hand, it's nice to have Hubert praise my baked goods. On the other, am I really only needed as a free babysitter and pastry chef? Sure, I'll bake a cake, I say. Justine quickly says goodbye, citing some important meeting, and walks away, leaving me with heavy bags and even heavier thoughts. At home, I set out the groceries and sit down at the table, feeling suddenly tired. Not physical. I'm used to the exertion, but emotional. I'm tired of being the convenient grandmother who is only remembered when necessary. Tired of fake smiles and superficial conversations. Tired of feeling used. But what can I do? They're my family, all I have left. If I refuse to help, if I set the boundaries Miriam says, won't they drift further apart? Will they stop coming altogether? That thought scares me the most. Better to be used than forgotten. On Saturday, I arrive at Hubert and Justine's house at 2 o'clock sharp with 2 freshly baked apple pies. The driveway is already filled with cars, music blaring from the backyard. Justine meets me at the door, dressed in a fancy summer dress, with a glass of wine in her hand. Dora, you're just in time. The kids are in the playroom upstairs. They're waiting for you. She takes the pies from me and disappears in the direction of the kitchen, not even offering me entry into the house. I walk up the stairs, feeling more like a servant than the mother of the master of the house. In the playroom, besides Ethan and Peyton, there are 3 other kids, apparently the children of Hubert's co-workers. They're engrossed in video games and barely pay attention to me when I walk in. Hey guys, I say with a strained smile. What do you want to do? Mom said we're supposed to sit here and not bother the adults, Ethan replies without looking away from the screen. I spend the entire day in the playroom, isolated from adult society, as if my place is right here with the kids. I hear laughter and conversation from downstairs, but no one invites me to join in. Even Hubert only glances up once to make sure everything's okay, and then he's gone back to his guests. By the time the last guests leave, it's almost 10 o'clock in the evening. I go downstairs to say goodbye. Justine looks a little tipsy, her perfect hair a little disheveled. "Thanks for your help, Dora," she says, hugging me with one arm. "And for the pies, they were the hit of the evening." "You're welcome," I reply automatically. Hubert walks over to us, and I notice he's had more than his usual drink, too. "Mom, are you leaving already? Stay the night. It's too late for driving." It's the first time all day he's shown concern for me, and I almost agree. But then I notice Justine tense up at those words, and I realize my presence is unwelcome. "No, thank you, darling. I can see well in the dark. I'll get there no problem." At home, lying in bed, I think about how imperceptibly, day by day, our relationship with Hubert has turned into this strange formality. When did it start? After we were married? After the children were born? Or was it a gradual process, so slow that I didn't notice until it was too late? I don't know the answer, but I do know one thing. Every time they use me and leave, a part of me dies, and I'm not sure how much is left. The bell rang as I was finishing wiping down the silver picture frames. I've noticed lately that I've been doing these pointless household chores more and more often, cleaning silver that no one uses, sorting through old letters that no one reads. Maybe it's a way of filling a void or proving to myself that I'm still worth something. "Mom?" Hubert's voice sounded unusually enthusiastic. "Are you busy this Friday night?" I almost laughed. Am I busy? At my 75, even going to the grocery store becomes an event. "No, honey, I don't have plans," I replied, trying to hide my surprise at the unexpected invitation. "Great. Justine and I want to take you out to dinner. We have some news we want to share." My heart sank for a moment. Could it be another child? Although Justine always said two was more than enough. Hubert's promotion, perhaps? Or are they moving? "I'd love to come," I said. "What time should I be there?" 7 o'clock. "And Mom." He paused. "Dress nice, okay? It's a special night." I felt a pang of resentment. Did I usually show up at their house in a bathrobe and curlers? But I didn't say anything. Hubert didn't seem to notice my reaction. "One more thing," he added. "The kids are staying with the nanny, so it'll be an adults-only dinner." Just an adult dinner. Odd, they usually insist I spend time with the grandkids. "They need to socialize with Grandma," Justine says, which translates to, "I need time to myself while you watch the kids." Friday evening came faster than I expected. I really made an effort to dress nice, choosing a navy blue dress I bought for a friend's funeral last year. Not the most festive occasion for a purchase, but the dress was elegant, and I didn't think even Justine would be able to pick on it. Hubert met me at the door with a smile that seemed a little strained. He was dressed in a suit, which in itself was unusual for a home-cooked dinner. "Mom, you look beautiful," he said, kissing my cheek. He smelled like expensive cologne and whiskey? Strange, Hubert didn't usually drink hard liquor except on special occasions. In the living room, Justine was fussing around the table, which was set with unusual care. China, crystal, candles, and silver candlesticks. My candlesticks, I noted mentally. "Dora," she exclaimed with exaggerated joy. "You look good." The good came with a slight hesitation as if she wanted to say something else but changed her mind. "Thank you, Justine," I replied. "It's very festive." "Oh, we did our best," she said, adjusting the already perfectly arranged glasses. "It's a very special evening." I was beginning to feel a little uneasy. Something about their behavior seemed unnatural, as if they were putting on a show for a single audience me. Hubert poured the wine, and we sat down at the table. Dinner began with a thin cream soup that I was sure Justine hadn't made herself. She had never been particularly keen on cooking, preferring to order food from restaurants or hire a caterer for special occasions. The conversation at first revolved around safe topics, the weather, the kids, the latest news. But I sensed that there was something else lurking behind this social exchange of pleasantries. Hubert seemed tense, glancing at Justine every now and then, as if waiting for a signal. When the main course of roast beef and vegetables arrived, Justine suddenly said, "Dora, you may have noticed that tonight is a special evening." I nodded, feeling my heart start to beat faster. Something in her tone made me wary. Hubert and I have something important to talk to you about, she continued, exchanging a glance with my son. Hubert coughed and straightened up, as if preparing a prepared speech. Mom, you know how much family means to us, he began, and how important it is for us to create the best possible environment for Ethan and Peyton. I nodded, still not sure where he was going with this. Our current house is getting a little cramped, Hubert continued. The kids are growing up, and they need more space. Besides, Ethan's school is in a different neighborhood, and he has to spend a lot of time on the road. We found the perfect house, Justine intervened, and her eyes lit up. It's in the Brookline neighborhood, just 5 minutes from Ethan's school. 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, big backyard with a pool. It's exactly what we need. It sounds wonderful, I said cautiously, still not sure what it had to do with me. Yes, the house is beautiful, Hubert confirmed. But there's just one problem. The price. And there it was. I felt something cold clench inside me. It's $870,000, Justine said, as if she'd said a reasonable amount. We can put a down payment on it, but we need help. And we thought of you, Mom, Hubert added, finally getting to the point. You live alone in a big house that's getting harder and harder for you to maintain. You have savings that, let's be honest, you're not likely to need at your age. I felt the blood rush to my face. At your age? Those words sounded like a judgment. We think it would be a great investment for the whole family, Hubert continued, not noticing my reaction. You could help us buy a house and we could take care of you. Maybe in time you could even move in with us if it gets too hard for you to live alone. There's a lovely guest room on the first floor, Justine said with fake enthusiasm. With a private bath, you wouldn't have to climb the stairs. I stared at them both, not believing my ears. They'd really invited me to dinner to ask me to give them all my savings for a house I might never even see except as a rare guest, or at best, a guest room resident. I don't understand, I said finally, trying to keep my voice calm. Do you want me to give you money for the house? Not exactly give it to me, Hubert answered quickly. More like investing in the family's future. Our future together. And exactly how much do you want invest? I asked, already guessing the answer. Justine and Hubert exchanged glances. We need $400,000 for the down payment, Hubert said, plus about 50 more for repairs and improvements. $450,000. Almost all of my savings, including the money from the sale of our summer cottage that I'd saved so carefully over the years. What will happen to my house, Amaze? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. We think you should sell it, Justine said, as if she were asking me to get rid of an old dress, not the house I had spent most of my life in. It's too big for one person, and the neighborhood isn't what it used to be. We could use the money from the sale to pay off some of the mortgage. I felt something inside me break. All these years I have supported them, given them money when they asked for it, babysat when they needed it, never complained or said no. And this is how they see my future. Sell my house, give them all my savings, and live out my life in their guest room. What if I say no? I asked quietly. Hubert looked as if I'd slapped him. What do you mean, no? He asked. Mom, it's for the family, for your grandchildren. My grandchildren I see every few months when you think of me, I said, surprised at my own audacity. And my house is all I have left from my life with your father. I'm not going to sell it. But it's just a house, Justine interjected with a hint of irritation in her voice. An old house that needs constant repairs. Be rational, Dora. It's not just the house, I replied. It's that you only come to me when you want something. When was the last time you invited me over without asking? Hubert and Justine exchanged confused glances. It's not fair, Mom, Hubert began. We have a very busy schedule, you know. Work, children. I know, I interrupted him. We all have our own things to worry about. But family isn't just about money. No one says family is all about money, Justine said with a strained smile. But right now we really need your help. Don't you want your grandchildren to grow up in a good home? In a good neighborhood? Of course I do, I replied. But I also want them to respect their grandmother and realize that I'm not an ATM machine from which you can take money on demand. The atmosphere at the table became tense. Hubert took a big swig of wine, and Justine clenched her fork so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Mother, Hubert said after a pause, and his voice sounded unusually firm. I don't think you realize how important this is to us. We don't just want a new house for fun. It's an investment in our future, in our children's education, in our stability. I understand, I replied. But that doesn't mean I have to give you all my savings. What are you going to do with it? Justine suddenly asked, her voice defiant. Take them to your grave? Justine! Hubert shook her off, but it was evident that he did not mind her words too much. No, seriously, she continued, looking at me. You're 75, Dora. How much longer do you plan to live? 5 years? 10? And then what? The money's going to Hubert and Thelma anyway. So why not help the family now when they really need it? I stared at her, struck by the cruelty of her words. Is she really sitting there calculating how long I have left to live? I could live another 20 years, I said quietly, and I will need that money for myself. For what? Justine snorted. For cruises you'll never take? For trips you don't have the energy for? Be realistic, Dora. Justine, that's enough, Hubert said, but not convincingly. No, let her go on, I said, feeling the anger growing inside me. Let her say what she really thinks. Justine looked at me defiantly. All right, I'll say it. I think you're selfish, Dora. You're sitting on a pile of money in your old house, while your son and grandchildren have to cram into a cramped apartment. You could help, but you'd rather cling to the past, to things, to memories that no one but you wants. My wife is tired of living in a cramped house. Hubert suddenly raised his voice, pounding his fist on the table so hard that the glasses bounced. Buy her a fancy new house. I recoiled, startled by his sudden outburst. Hubert had never raised his voice at me before. I don't have to buy you a house, I said, trying to speak calmly. You're adults. You have good jobs. Save up like any other normal family. Saving? Justine asked with a bitter laugh. Do you realize how long it would take us to save for a house like this? Years. And the children won't wait. They're growing up now. That's not my problem, I said, and immediately regretted my words. Hubert's face darkened with anger. Not your problem? He repeated. Your own grandchildren aren't your problem. That's not what I meant, I began, but he didn't let me finish. No, that's exactly what you meant, he shouted, getting up from the table. All your life you've done nothing but think about yourself. Even when your father was alive, everything was always about you, your needs, your wants. It was an outright lie, and we both knew it. I always put my family first, always sacrificed my own interests for Hubert, Thelma, and Edmund. That's not true, I said, feeling my voice tremble. I've always thought of you first. If that were true, Justine intervened, you wouldn't hesitate for a second. You would have given us that money because you love your son and your grandchildren. I love you, I said, tears welling up in my eyes. But that doesn't mean I have to give you everything I have. Then maybe you don't love us as much as you say you do, Hubert said coldly. Those words hit me harder than any physical pain. I looked at my son, the boy I had raised, the boy I loved more than life, and I didn't recognize him. I think I should go, I said, getting up from the table. Sit down, Hubert shouted, and I obeyed, shocked by his tone. We haven't finished. Yes, we are, I said, gathering the strength to rise again. I'm not giving you the money for the house. That's my final decision. I stood up and headed for the door. Hubert blocked my way. You're not leaving until we settle this matter, he said, and I saw something foreign, unfamiliar in his eyes. Please step back, I asked, feeling my heart start to beat faster with fear. No, he answered, taking a step toward me. You will stay and listen to the rest of our conversation. Hubert, I want to go home, I said, trying to speak firmly, but my voice trembled. Home? To that old, rundown house you refuse to sell? He asked bitterly. The one that stands on a piece of land worth more than you'll ever be able to spend? It's my house, I said. And I don't have to sell it just because you want to buy a house you can't afford. I saw his face contort with anger. I'd never seen Hubert like that before, white lips, dilated pupils. You selfish, stubborn old woman, he shouted, and I recoiled as if struck. Always thinking of yourself. Hubert, calm down, Justine intervened, for the first time showing concern for the situation. You've had too much to drink. No, let her know what I think of her, he continued, keeping his eyes on me. Let her know how tired we are of her pettiness, her constant reminders of how much she's done for us. As if we owed her anything. You don't owe me anything, I said quietly. I never asked for anything in return. Yes, you did, he shouted. With every breath you took, every sad look you gave us, you asked us to be grateful, to feel guilty for having a life of our own. I shook my head, unable to believe this was my son speaking. I never. Stop it! He slammed his fist against the wall and I flinched. Stop pretending to be a victim! You're not a victim, you're a manipulator! All your life you've been manipulating us, making us feel guilty, using your love as a weapon. I tried to step around him to get to the door, but he made a sudden movement and grabbed my arm, squeezing it so hard that I cried out in pain. Let go of me, I demanded, trying to break free. Not until you agree to help us, he said, and his face was so close to mine that I could smell the alcohol in his breath. Hubert, let her go, Justine said as she approached us. You're hurting her. But it was as if he hadn't heard. His fingers clenched tighter and tighter, and I felt my hand go numb. I said, let go! I jerked with unexpected strength, breaking free of his grip. Hubert, who hadn't expected resistance, swayed and then, to my horror, shoved me. Not hard, but enough to make me lose my balance and fall, hitting my hip on the edge of the coffee table. The pain was sharp and immediate. I yelped, clutching at the bruised area. The room was dead silent for a moment. Justine froze with a look of shock on her face. Hubert looked at me as if he couldn't believe what he'd just done. Mom, he began, and for the first time all evening there was remorse in his voice. I didn't mean to. Stay away from me, I said, struggling to get to my feet. My hip hurt, but I tried not to show it. Don't ever come near me again. Mom, please, I didn't do it on purpose. He took a step toward me, holding out his hand, but I backed away. I'm leaving, I said, heading for the door. Every step hurt, but I was determined to get out of this house as soon as possible. Dora, you can't drive in this condition, Justine said, showing some concern for the first time. Let Hubert drive you. I'll call a cab, I replied, pulling my cell phone out of my purse. My hands were shaking so badly that I could hardly hit the buttons. Mom, please. Hubert looked frightened, as if he'd just realized what he'd done. Let's talk. I wasn't myself. I'd had too much to drink. No, I said firmly. I have nothing more to say to you. I walked out of the house, limping and holding onto the wall for support. The cool evening air hit my face, and I inhaled deeply, trying to calm myself. Only now did I feel tears streaming down my cheeks. The cab arrived 15 minutes later, which felt like an eternity. I'd been standing on the porch the whole time, refusing to go back inside, despite Hubert and Justine's entreaties. They both came out after me, but kept their distance, seeing my condition. At home, I struggled up the porch steps, each step a pain in my bruised hip. It was dark and quiet inside. Only the old clock in the living room counted down the seconds with a monotonous ticking. I turned on the light and slowly lowered myself onto the couch, writhing in pain. I carefully lifted the hem of my dress to examine the bruise. A large bruise, dark purple with red edges, was already beginning to form on my thigh. It would be worse tomorrow. The phone in my purse vibrated. Hubert. I didn't answer it. He called again, then another. Then came the message. Mom, please answer. I'm so sorry, I don't know what came over me. I put the phone away, not wanting to read more. Tears flowed down my cheeks again, and this time I didn't hold them back. I cried for the son I seemed to have lost, for the grandchildren I saw so rarely, for the husband who wasn't there when I needed him. In the morning, every movement resonated with pain. I struggled to get out of bed, trying not to lean on my bruised hip. The mirror reflected a tired woman with sleepless eyes and a pale face. I didn't recognize myself. Or maybe it was the other way around. The first time in a long time I saw the real me, without the mask of the uncomplaining mother and grandmother. There were 12 missed calls from Hubert on my phone and a few messages. Mom, please forgive me. Mom, I don't know what came over me. Mom, call me when you read this. I put the phone away, not wanting to answer it. What could I say to him? That I forgive him? I wasn't sure about that. The pain in my hip wasn't as sharp as yesterday, but it was still palpable. I gingerly touched the bruise. It darkened and widened, turning a nasty blue-purple color with yellowish edges. I wasn't used to bruises at my age. My skin was thin and vulnerable, and sometimes all it took was a slight bump on the corner of a table to make a mark. But this bruise was different. It was a reminder that my own son had raised his hand against me. Over breakfast, a cup of tea and toast with jam, I reflected on last night. Anger, resentment, disappointment, all of those feelings struggled inside me, but something else shone through. Determination. For the first time in years, I felt a sharp, unyielding determination to act. I pulled out the phone book. Yes, I still use such archaic things, and started looking up the number. Long ago, when Edmund was still alive, we'd gone to a lawyer named Mortimer Price. He'd helped us with the paperwork on the house and the first version of our will. I wasn't sure if he was still practicing. It had been so many years, but he was the only lawyer I knew personally. To my surprise, the number was still active. The female voice on the other end of the line introduced herself as Amelia, Mr. Price's secretary. When I said my name, there was a note of recognition in her voice. "Mrs. Lisat? Edmund Lisat's widow?" she asked again. "Yes, that's me," I answered, a little surprised to be remembered. "Mr. Price will be glad to see you. He's in a meeting right now, but I can put you down for a—" She paused, apparently looking at her schedule. "For 2 hours today. Would that be all right with you?" "Yes, thank you," I said, relieved that I wouldn't have to wait long. "Well, I'll see you later, Mrs. Lisat. The address is the same, 16 Elm Street." I hung up the phone and felt a strange thrill. This was the first step toward something new, toward a life in which I would make decisions based on my own interests, not those of my children. My old Buick didn't start on the first try, as if it shared my doubts. Finally, the engine rumbled, and I drove slowly out of the yard. Mortimer Price's office was in the business part of town, about 20 minutes from my house. Elm Street hadn't changed much over the years. The same Victorian buildings turned into offices, the same neat flower beds out front. Number 16 stood out with a freshly painted facade and a new sign. Price and Associates, Legal Services. Inside, I was greeted by a young woman with a welcoming smile, the same Amelia I'd spoken to on the phone. "Mrs. Lisat, Mr. Price is expecting you," she said as she escorted me down the hall to the office at the end. Mortimer Price had changed a lot since the last time I'd seen him. His hair, once brown, was now completely gray. His face was wrinkled, and his once slender figure had become heavy. But his eyes were still the same, lively and attentive. "Dora Lessett," he exclaimed, rising to meet me. "How many years, how many winters?" "Hello, Mr. Price," I said, shaking his outstretched hand. "Please, just Mortimer. We've known each other too long for formalities." He pointed to the chair across from his desk. "Have a seat. What can I do for you?" I sat down, carefully straightening my dress, and suddenly felt uncertain. Where to begin? How do I explain what brought me here? "I want to revise my will," I finally said. To take some steps to protect my assets." Mortimer looked at me carefully, as if assessing something beyond my words. "Is something wrong, Dora?" he asked softly. I hadn't planned to tell him about last night's incident, but something in his tone, in the genuine concern in his eyes, made me open up. "My son," I began, and suddenly I felt tears coming to my throat. "My son raised his hand against me yesterday." Mortimer frowned. "Tell me everything," he said, pulling a notebook and pen from his desk drawer. And I did. About how Hubert and Justine had invited me to dinner, about their demand that I give them money for a new house, about the quarrel that followed my refusal, and finally about how Hubert had pushed me when I tried to leave. "I have a bruise," I added, pointing to my thigh. "Did you go to the police?" Mortimer asked. I shook my head. "No, he is my son after all. I don't want to go to the police." Mortimer nodded, accepting my decision, though I could see on his face that he didn't quite agree. "Okay, let's talk about your assets and how to protect them," he said, getting down to business. "What do you have so far?" I told him about the house, about my savings, about the small investments Edmund had made that I'd kept. I told him about the secret account that neither Hubert nor Thelma knew about. "And you want to change your will?" Mortimer said, making notes in his notebook. Yes, I answered firmly. I want most of my assets to go to charity after my death, to the Hope Children's Hospice, with which Edmund and I cooperated during his lifetime. What about your children? Mortimer asked, neither approving nor disapproving. I want to leave them 20% of the total, I said after a moment's thought, but not all at once. I want that money to be paid to them in monthly installments for 10 years after my death, no more than $1,000 a month each. Mortimer raised his eyebrows. That's an unusual decision. May I ask why? Because I know my children, I answered bitterly. If they get it all at once, they'll spend it in a month. This way, they'll have a stable source of income for a long time. And the grandchildren? I wondered. Ethan and Peyton weren't to blame for their parents' behavior. And who knows, maybe in time they'll be better than Hubert and Justine. I want to leave my grandchildren 10% each, but with the condition that they can get this money only after the age of 25 and only for education or buying their first home. Mortimer nodded, writing down my wishes. And the house? I want to sell the house while I'm still alive, I said, surprised at my own determination. The thought had come to me only now, but it seemed right. But not now, when I'm ready to move to a smaller place. I see, Mortimer said. Now let's talk about protecting your assets during your lifetime. You mentioned that you wanted to make arrangements. Yes, I nodded. I'm afraid that Hubert or Justine might try to gain control of my finances, especially if my health deteriorates. I've heard of cases where children have declared their elderly parents incapacitated in order to manage their assets. It does happen, Mortimer confirmed with a serious look. And you're right to be concerned about it, especially considering yesterday's incident. He pulled some folders out of the cabinet and started going through the documents. There are several ways to protect your assets. First, we can set up a trust into which your major assets will be transferred. You will be the beneficiary of this trust during your lifetime, and upon your death, the funds will be distributed according to your instructions. Importantly, the trust will be administered by an independent trustee, such as a bank or law firm, and not by your children. I nodded, although I didn't fully understand all the legal intricacies. Second, Mortimer continued, we'll draw up a medical power of attorney document and a power of attorney for administration of the estate. In it, you will name the person you trust to make decisions for you if you can't make them yourself. It doesn't have to be one of your children, given the circumstances. Miriam, I said without thinking. My neighbor and friend. She's the only person I trust completely. Good, Mortimer nodded. We'll include her in the paperwork. I also recommend that you make a lifetime healthcare directive, a document in which you specify your wishes for medical care in the event of serious illness or incapacity. We talked for another hour or so, discussing details and signing preliminary documents. Mortimer promised to have the paperwork ready by the end of the week and scheduled our next appointment for Friday. As I walked out of his office, I felt lighter in my heart. For the first time in a long time, I felt that I was in control of my life, that I was making decisions not under pressure, not out of guilt or obligation, but because I felt they were right for me. On the way home, I stopped by the bank and transferred most of the money from my main account to a secret account that the kids didn't know about. It was a precaution in case Hubert or Justine tried to access my finances. The bank knew me, and the transaction went smoothly. At home, I was surprised to find a huge basket of flowers on the porch. Attached to it was a card. Mom, forgive me. I don't know what came over me. Please call me. Love, Hubert. I took the basket into the house, though I wanted to leave it on the porch. The flowers were beautiful. Lilies, roses, orchids. But they couldn't erase the memory of last night and the pain and humiliation I'd experienced. The phone rang almost as soon as I entered the house. Hubert, of course. He must have been watching the house or had the delivery man let me know when I would accept the flowers. I hesitated, staring at the phone screen. Part of me wanted to answer it, to listen to my son's apology, accept it, and go back to my old life. The other part, the new, determined part, resisted that impulse. In the end, I answered. Mother! Hubert's voice sounded relieved. Did you get the flowers? Yes, thank you, I answered dryly. Mother, I'm so sorry about yesterday. I don't know what came over me. I had too much to drink. I was upset about work. It's no excuse, I know, but please believe me, I never meant to hurt you. His voice shook, and I almost believed his remorse was sincere. Almost. I'm listening, I said, neither apologizing nor blaming. Justine and I want to apologize in person. Can we come over tonight, or will you come to us? Whatever's convenient for you. I thought about the bruise on my thigh, the sleepless night, the visit to the lawyer tonight. Not tonight, Hubert, I need time. Sure, he agreed hastily. When you're ready. Just know that Justine and I are very worried and want to make things right. Fix what? I wanted to ask. The fact that you pushed me, or the fact that I refused to give you money for the house? I'll call you when I'm ready to talk, I said instead. Okay, Mom, I love you, you know that, don't you? I didn't answer that question, just said goodbye and hung up. In the evening, Miriam stopped by. She brought freshly baked cinnamon rolls and tea, which she said was supposed to help me relax. You look different, she remarked as we sat in the kitchen. Did something happen? I hesitated, not knowing if I should tell her about last night. But then I decided that if I was going to trust her to make decisions about my health and property, in the event of my incapacity, she needed to know the truth. So I did. About Hubert and Justine's claim, about the fight, about the push, about the bruise on my thigh, about today's visit to the lawyer and the decision to change the will. Miriam listened without interrupting, only occasionally shaking her head or clenching her fists in indignation. And you want me to be your trustee? She asked when I was done. If you agree, I replied. I realize it's a big responsibility, and you can refuse. Dora, she interrupted, taking my hand. I'm honored that you would trust me with something like this. Of course I do. I felt relieved and grateful. Miriam was the person I could trust with my life and my decisions. Thank you, I said, squeezing her hand in return. You're welcome, dear. Now show me that bruise, she said in a practiced tone. I have a great ointment that will help it heal faster. The next day, Hubert sent another basket, this time with fruit and expensive chocolates. It came with an apology card from Justine, written in calligraphy on expensive paper. Dear Dora, I am deeply sorry for what has happened. Hubert and I love you very much and hope for your forgiveness. Love, Justine. I placed the basket next to the flowers and did not answer the call that followed shortly after the delivery. In the evening, Thelma called from Arizona the first time in months without asking for money. Apparently, Hubert had told her what had happened. Mom, are you all right? She asked with a concern in her voice that was unusual for her. Hubert said you had some sort of quarrel. I'm fine, I replied. I just need some time to think things over. What happened? Hubert didn't go into details. He just said you had a fight about money. Of course, he wouldn't tell me he pushed me. Typical of Hubert to downplay his guilt. We did fight about money, I said, not wanting to drag Thelma into the story. But I didn't want to discuss it now. Okay, Mom. I could hear the disappointment in her voice. Just know that I'm here if you need to talk. Thank you, dear, I said, even though I knew I wasn't likely to take advantage of the offer. Thelma had always been on Hubert's side ever since he was a little girl. The next day came a message from Justine. Dora, the children miss you. They don't understand why Grandma suddenly stopped answering the phone. Please, at least for their sake, let's try to fix this. This was clearly emotional blackmail, and I didn't fall for it. Instead, I called my doctor and made an appointment. I wanted to make sure my hip was okay and maybe get an injury certificate. Not for the police, but for myself, to confirm what had happened if necessary. On Friday, I met with Mortimer Price again. He had prepared all the necessary documents, the new will, the trust creation papers, the medical power of attorney in Miriam's name. We discussed each item in detail, made a few amendments, and finally signed everything in front of a notary. That's it, Mortimer said when we were done. Now your assets are protected, and only you will be in charge of them. No one can access them without your consent. I felt strangely relieved, like I'd lost a weight I'd been carrying around for years without realizing it. Thank you, Mortimer, I said, shaking his hand. You have no idea how much better I feel. That's my job, Dora, he smiled. And if I may give you some advice, not as a lawyer, but as an old acquaintance, don't let guilt or obligation run your life. You deserve happiness and peace in these years." I nodded, touched by his words. He was right. I had lived for others for too long, forgetting about myself. It was time to change that. As I left Mortimer's office, I decided to do something I hadn't done in years. Go to a cafe, alone, just to sit and have a cup of coffee and watch the passers-by. A small pleasure that I always put off for later because there were more important things to do, more important people demanding my attention. I chose a small cafe on the corner of Elm and Maple Streets, with cozy tables by the window and pleasant music playing in the background. I ordered a cappuccino and a slice of blueberry pie. I sat watching people on the street, and for the first time in a long time, I felt free. My cell phone vibrated in my pocket, Hubert again. This time, I decided to answer it. "Mom?" His voice sounded uncertain. "Did you get our presents?" "Yes, thank you," I answered neutrally. "Justine and I want to invite you to dinner on Sunday. The kids really want to see you, and we want to apologize in person." I thought about it. Part of me wanted to say no, to keep my distance, but the other part reminded me that despite everything that had happened, they were still my family. And I really missed my grandchildren. "Okay," I said finally. "What time?" 6 o'clock? Hubert suggested, and I could hear the relief in his voice. "I can pick you up." "No, I'll come myself," I said firmly. I wasn't going to become dependent on them, even for little things like transportation. "Whatever you say, Mom. See you Sunday then." I finished my coffee, paid, and walked out of the cafe. It was sunny outside, and I decided to walk a little, despite the aching pain in my hip. As I passed a bookstore, I saw a book about traveling in Europe in the window. Without hesitation, I went inside and bought it. Maybe it was time to fulfill that dream of traveling that I had always put off. Maybe it was time to live for myself. With that thought in mind, I headed home feeling strangely excited, as if I had opened a new door for myself behind which lurked a multitude of possibilities. Sunday dinner turned out to be exactly as strained as I had expected. Hubert and Justine were overly attentive, constantly asking if I was comfortable, if I needed anything else. The grandchildren didn't seem to notice this unnatural atmosphere. Ethan was absorbed in his new tablet, and Peyton was talking about the school play in which she had gotten the lead role. After dinner, when the children had gone to their rooms, Hubert coughed and began what was obviously a prepared speech. "Mother, I want to apologize again for what happened," he said, looking me straight in the eye. "It was unforgivable, and I completely understand if you can't forgive me." Justine put her hand on her husband's arm in a gesture of support. "We're both very sorry, Dora," she added. "We crossed the line, and it's wrong." I looked at them both, trying to see how sincere their apology was. There was something in their eyes, some wariness that made me doubt. "I appreciate your apology," I said finally. "But you see, it's not just about what happened that night. It's about the way our relationship has worked out over the years." Hubert and Justine exchanged quick glances. "What do you mean, Mother?" Hubert asked cautiously. "I mean that you only think of me when you need something," I said bluntly. "Money, help with the children, my things for your events. But when I need company, family, simple attention, you're not there." Justine looked like she wanted to object, but held back. Hubert lowered his gaze. "We're very busy, Mother," he said quietly. "Work, children, home. We just don't have time for everything." "We all have our priorities," I replied. "And I realize I'm not one of yours. That's your right. But I have a right to prioritize mine." "What are you saying?" Hubert's voice was troubled. "I've decided to make some changes in my life," I said, trying to speak calmly and confidently. "I'm selling the house." There was silence. Hubert and Justine looked at me as if I had announced that I was going to fly to the moon. "You're selling the house?" Hubert asked. "But why? Where will you move to?" "I found a small apartment in the Riverside neighborhood," I answered. "A one-bedroom on the first floor with a little garden. It's much more comfortable for me than the old house with its stairs and constant need for repairs." Justine was the first to recover from the shock. "But Dora, it's your house, where you've lived for so many years. Wouldn't it be better to hire an au pair if you're having trouble taking care of it?" I shook my head. "It's not just the upkeep. It's too big for me on my own, and there are too many memories to carry. I need something new, something of my own. Hubert looked confused. Have you signed the papers yet? He asked. The preliminary contract, I answered. The official sale is in 2 weeks. How much are you selling it for? Justine's question sounded too hasty, too interested. 720,000, I said, watching their reactions. Justine's eyes widened. Even in her outrage, she couldn't hide her mental calculations. That's less than it's worth, she said. You could get at least 850 if you found the right buyer. Maybe, I agreed. But the young family that's buying it is very fond of it. They have 2 kids, and they love the neighborhood. I'd rather sell it to them, even if it means getting a little less. And what do you plan to do with the money? Hubert asked, trying to make the question sound casual. Part of it will go to buy an apartment, 190,000. Another 200,000 I will donate to the Children's Hospice Hope. The rest I'll invest in an annuity that will provide me with a steady income for the rest of my life. Hubert's face darkened. The Children's Hospice? He asked again. 200,000? Yes, I confirmed. It was important to your father, and it was important to me, too. But? Hubert hesitated, clearly trying to find words that wouldn't betray his real thoughts. Wouldn't it be better to keep that money in the family? For the grandchildren? For their education? Ethan and Peyton have parents with good incomes, I said, looking directly at Justine. And I'm sure you're already saving for their education. Justine looked away. We all knew she wasn't. It's your money, of course, Hubert said with a strained smile. You're free to use it as you wish. It's a little sudden. For me too, I admitted. But sometimes the unexpected is the right thing to do. The rest of the evening passed in a strange atmosphere. Hubert and Justine tried to make casual conversation, but I could feel their tension, their attempts to make sense of a new reality in which they wouldn't get the house or the money they'd hoped for. The next day, Hubert called me while I was packing books into boxes. Mom, have you changed your mind about selling the house? He asked without preamble. No, Hubert, I haven't changed my mind, I answered calmly. And about the money, too? I could hear hope in his voice. And about the money, too. He sighed. You see, Justine and I were we were hoping we could use your house as collateral to get a loan for that house we were talking about. So that's how they planned it. Convinced me to leave them the house as an inheritance and then use it as collateral before I died. I'm afraid you'll have to find another way, I said. Perhaps start with a smaller house that you can afford without my help. But that's not fair, Mother, he suddenly blurted out. You know how hard the real estate market is right now. We'll never be able to save up for a down payment on a decent house. Your father and I did, I reminded him. We worked, we saved, we denied ourselves a lot of things. That's what most families do. But that was a different time, he objected. Things are different now. Maybe, I agreed. But my decision remains unchanged. I'm selling the house, donating some of the money to charity, and giving myself stability for the rest of my years. After that conversation, Hubert didn't call me for almost a week. When he finally did call, his voice sounded reserved, as if he were talking to a business associate rather than a mother. We'd like to help you move, he said. What day would be convenient for you? I gave him a date, and he promised that he and Justine would be there to help. I knew their help was a last-ditch effort to convince me to change my mind, but I was grateful for it anyway. Packing and moving at my age wasn't the easiest thing to do. Moving day was sunny and warm. Miriam arrived early in the morning to help with the final preparations. Hubert, Justine, and the grandchildren arrived at 10 o'clock when the movers had already started moving the furniture out. You made up your mind, after all, Justine said, looking around the half-empty rooms with undisguised disappointment. Yes, I did, I confirmed, not giving in to the provocation. Hubert was unusually quiet, helping the movers with boxes and furniture. The children ran around the empty rooms, their voices echoing off the walls, making it feel strangely like someone else's house instead of mine. By noon, everything was loaded into the truck. I walked around the empty rooms one last time, saying goodbye to each one, remembering the moments I'd lived in them. The bedroom where Edmund had died, in the nursery where Hubert had grown up, The living room where we'd gathered as a family so many times for Christmas and Thanksgiving. Are you ready? Miriam asked, standing in the doorway. I nodded, wiping away an unsolicited tear. Ready. My new apartment was in a modern senior housing complex. It was bright, spacious, with large windows and a small garden where I planned to grow flowers. The complex had a pool, a library, a hobby room, and even a small movie theater. When the truck with my things arrived, Hubert and Justine were already waiting at the entrance. They helped unload the stuff and set up the furniture, though I could see Justine constantly looking at her watch, clearly in a hurry to leave. I need to get the kids away from my mom, she said finally. We left them there so they wouldn't get in the way of the move. Sure, go ahead, I replied. You've been a big help already. When they left, Miriam and I continued unpacking and organizing the apartment. By evening, the main things were done, and we sat on the balcony with cups of tea, watching the sunset. How are you feeling? Miriam asked. I was thinking. Strange, I answered at last. Sad about saying goodbye to the old house, but also free. It was as if I'd shed a heavy weight I'd been carrying for years. Miriam nodded understandingly. Sometimes you have to let go of the past to move forward. The next day, I met with the administrator of Hope Children's Hospice to hand over a check for $200,000. A young woman named Rebecca was overwhelmed by the size of the donation. That's incredibly generous, Mrs. Lasat, she said, struggling to hold back tears. You have no idea how many children this will help. I hope so, I replied. My husband always believed in the importance of supporting children in difficult situations. This donation is a tribute to his memory. That same day, I met with a financial advisor and set up an annuity that would provide me with a steady monthly income for the rest of my life. For the first time in years, I felt financially secure, independent of the mercy of children or unforeseen circumstances. In the evening, Thelma called from Arizona. Apparently, Hubert had already told her the news. Mother, is it true you sold the house? She asked without preamble. Yes, it's true, I confirmed. And you gave $200,000 to charity? Mom, are you out of your mind? I sighed. Typical Thelma to jump straight to accusations. Yes, Thelma, I am sane. I made a decision that I think is right for me. But it's family money, she exclaimed. Hubert and I were counting on it. It's my money, Thelma, I said firmly, earned by me and your father, and I've decided to use it as I see fit. She continued to resent me for several more minutes, but I was adamant. Eventually, she gave up, saying that I would have to pay for it when I needed the children's help. I made sure I didn't need your help, I said calmly. That's why I made this decision. After talking to Thelma, I felt strangely relieved. It was as if the last strings that had bound me to my role as a dutiful mother who would do anything for her children had been cut. Now I was just Dora, a woman living her life on her own terms. The first weeks in the new apartment were full of discoveries. I got to know my neighbors, elderly people just like me, many of whom also lived alone. We quickly found common ground, especially with Eleanor, a widow my age who lived in the apartment next door. The apartment complex had a constant stream of activities, from art classes to dance nights for the elderly. I started attending the book club that Miriam had talked about for so long, and found that I really enjoyed discussing what I was reading with other people. Hubert called less and less often, and when he did, the conversation was strained and short. I realized that he couldn't forgive me for my decision, but I hoped that in time, his resentment would pass. One evening, about a month after the move, the doorbell rang. Hubert stood on the doorstep, looking tired and lost. Hi, Mom, he said. May I come in? I let him in, surprised by the unexpected visit. Is something wrong? I asked, offering him tea. He shook his head, looking around my apartment with an expression I couldn't quite make out. It's cozy, he said finally. Do you like it? Yes, very much, I replied. It's comfortable, and the neighbors are great. He nodded, looking out the window at the small garden I was starting to organize. Mom, I came to apologize, he said suddenly, for the way I acted after your decision to sell the house. It was not nice of me. I was surprised by his words, but even more so by the sincerity in them. I realize it was sudden, I said softly. It's not just that, he continued. Yeah, Justine and I were really counting on your money. We'd almost agreed to buy that house, thinking you'd agree to help. It was wrong of us to plan our lives around your money. I didn't know what to say. This sincerity was new to our family, where we usually preferred to understate things and avoid confrontation. What's wrong, Hubert? I finally asked. Why did you suddenly decide to apologize? He sighed, clutching his teacup. I was talking to an old friend of Dad's, Tom Baker. I ran into him by chance in town. He told me how you and Dad had been saving for years for a down payment on a house, how you'd given up everything to make sure Thelma and I got a good education, and I suddenly realized how, selfish I'd been. Justine and I wanted what you and Dad had earned all our lives. I was touched by his words. Tom Baker really was Edmund's best friend, and he knew our story well. I'm glad you realize that, I said. And I don't hold a grudge against you, Hubert. I just want to live out my remaining years with dignity and independence. And you have every right to do that, he nodded. Justine and I have revised our plans. We've decided to start with a smaller house in the suburbs. It's not what Justine had in mind, but it's what we can afford. It's a wise decision, I said. Your father always said, live within your means and you'll live in peace. Hubert smiled, the first genuine smile in a long time, without a shadow of resentment or ulterior motive. I wish the children would visit you more often, he said. They miss their grandmother. I miss them too, I replied. They are always welcome here. After Hubert left, I sat on the balcony for a long time, looking at the stars and thinking about the turn my life had taken. I felt a strange peace, as if I had finally found my place in the world, not as a mother or grandmother, always willing to sacrifice herself for others, but as a woman with her own desires, interests, and right to happiness. In the following months, my life was filled with new events and acquaintances. I enrolled in computer literacy courses for the elderly and learned how to use the internet, email, and even social networks. This opened up a new world for me. I could communicate with people all over the world, find information about topics I was interested in, even order groceries with home delivery, which was especially convenient in bad weather. I started traveling, first not far away to neighboring towns, then farther away. At 76, I saw the ocean for the first time, standing on a beach in Maine and feeling the cold waves wash over my feet. At one of my painting classes, I met Harold Finch, a widower my age with kind eyes and an infectious laugh. He invited me for a cup of coffee after class, and I accepted, surprised at my own audacity. Our relationship with Hubert gradually improved. He called more often, sometimes dropping by for no reason at all. Justine was still distant, but at least she had stopped expressing her dissatisfaction with my decision. Thelma, too, had come to terms with it, especially when she learned that I'd left my children a small portion of my money in my will, not as much as they'd expected, but enough to show that I hadn't cut them out of my life completely. One evening, sitting in my little garden and watching the sun go down, I thought about the path I'd traveled over the years, about the pain I had to endure, the decisions I had to make, and the freedom I had found. I thought about Edmund and what he would say about my new life. I had a feeling he would have been pleased. He always wanted me to be strong and independent, even when he himself was around. In that moment, I realized that I had finally found what I had been missing for so long, a sense of self-worth and inner freedom. I was no longer just someone's mother or grandmother, existing only to fulfill the needs of others. I was Dora Lasat, a woman living her life on her own terms, enjoying each day and each new discovery, and that was the most important legacy I could leave to my children and grandchildren. An example that it was never too late to start living for yourself, never too late to find freedom and dignity, even if it meant going through pain and making hard choices. My phone rang. It was Harold, inviting me to a classical music concert in the park that weekend. I accepted, feeling a slight excitement like a young girl before a first date. Life went on, and for the first time in years, I was really living, not just existing, and it was a wonderful feeling,